a disadvantage, but will the GMAC bailout be a boon for consumers? Here to score it for us is the car coach, Lauren Fix. She joins us from Rochester via Skype. Oh, there it is. I'm looking at you right now. That works out very nicely. I like that. And in L.A., James Bell of Intellichoice.com. James, let me go to you first, because Cerberus, to me, is the most interesting element here. Cerberus is a private equity firm. They had 80 or more % of Chrysler. They own GMAC. There's the three-headed horse. They have all these contacts inside the Beltway, and they're getting away with a lot here. I mean, they're using all of their contacts to get paid off for all of those elements that they got suckered into taking a couple of years ago. Is there something going on here where only the well-connected survive?
Well, I think we already know that's true in many different environments. But I think in this particular case with Cerberus, I don't think they're getting away with murder quite the way you lay it out. You know, they already gave up all but 15% of their stake in GMAC so they wouldn't be held to the same standard as banks are and the securities there. So they've already kind of stepped away from that side. They're giving up their stake in Chrysler in this whole transition onto Fiat or whoever else. So they've lost a ton. This is not going to be something that when you look at their balance sheet years forward from now, it's going to wash out to or even be an advantage.
But hold on a second, Lauren, they could. It's true they've lost some, but they could have lost a lot more. I mean, the point is Chrysler was this huge albatross around their neck. Think of how much bondholders have lost. Bondholders who thought they had secure bonds, which didn't turn out to be, of Chrysler, for example, they're getting pennies, if that, on the dollar. So, I mean, you know, the fact is Cerberus used all of their influence to back out from a situation that could have been much worse for them.
It was absolutely a terrible situation. And the first mistake was merging with Daimler, and the products that they produced were obviously products that consumers didn't want. And then it just kept on hitting that domino theory where soon they weren't producing products, and then they separated from Daimler. And now we're in this really bad situation where Cerberus is, like Jim had said, is not going to end up with a great bottom line. You're not going to see them down the road saying, wow, that was a good move. It was obviously a bad move. My concern is that the government's going to own a big chunk of GMAC, and they still own a big chunk of Chrysler, which means we now have government motors, which unfortunately GM looks to be going down that same pathway. My concern is we don't want the government telling us what we want to drive and telling us that they're going to be building cars because they can't even run government properly.
Well, and frankly, telling us everything about standards with regard to exhaust emissions, et cetera, right, which we got this week. They can do anything they want with the car industry once they have it in their hands. And frankly, you know, it fits into a lot of, you think of the agenda, the green agenda that this president has, and it fits into a lot of his other agendas. So maybe he's not unhappy with having General Motors turning into government motors.
Well, I think it's a big disaster because who doesn't want better fuel economy, less greenhouse gases, and low prices on gasoline? But what's the real results? The results are we're going to be told what we want to drive. And I'm sure Jim will agree with me that none of us want to drive beige cars that get 100 miles to the gallon because that's not what consumers want. We're America. We all have different needs, and we all have to have a different selection and assortment of cars. And if the government gets involved, that won't happen.
Jim, we were talking to Jim Gelter about whether or not Ford is put at a competitive disadvantage. Where does Ford fit in here? How do they compete with the unending resources of the U.S. government?
Well, I think, you mentioned earlier in your piece about how they kind of have a little bit of a wave going, a little positive energy going on for them now. Maybe it's taking that kind of us against the world attitude, but I think it's paying off. But they are further down in their program. They've gone a lot further in integrating their European operations, which are producing some amazing vehicles. Wait till you drive the new Ford Fiesta. They've already mortgaged themselves when credit markets were still solid. Right. They've already taken their loan, so to speak. But I think it's not... You know, they're in better position. And now that the government has a stake in General Motors and Chrysler, you know, they're protecting their investment, so to speak, which is protecting us as taxpayers as well. I think it doesn't necessarily put Ford at a disadvantage as much as it identifies that Ford is at an advantage and is down a road that it's just a darn shame that Chrysler and General Motors aren't on the same.
I would love it if Ford emerged stronger after all this. And in fact, they also had their workouts with the dealers a lot earlier than GM and Chrysler, which never really bit the bullet on their own in that. But can they? Do you think they will? Will they buck that trend of competing with somebody that has the U.S. Treasury at its beck and call?
Well, I think Ford's actually going to do quite well. 3 years ago, they started folding down dealers that weren't making a lot of sales. And because of that, you saw a few Ford dealers disappear. And I know at that time everyone kind of got upset about it, but they're not planning on cutting 789 dealers like Chrysler did, or so far only 1,100 GM dealers. What you're seeing is they're bringing a global platform. You're going to see that with the Taurus, which is a beautiful piece of equipment. They're coming with very high safety standards. They want to be class leading, and they're planning on fighting against Toyota to be the #1 manufacturer. And I think you're going to be impressed with some of the things that they've got coming down the pike.
I love it. I love it. This is great. This is music to my ears. I want to bring in the panel, by the way.